Well, Jeff, it's so great to connect today. We have a lot of shared research interests. We publish in similar journals, and we both have ties to BYU, so it's great to chat today.
Thank you. Delighted to be here, Nate.
So, as you think back on the research you've conducted, your work, your career, your life, what would you most want to pass on to others?
Hmm. Um, that's interesting because I think I've always had sort of a mission orientation toward my work, and I found that I needed a sense of a purpose, of a big why to drive my career. And frankly, it took me a really long time to find that. But if I were to boil it down, I am really energized by working with people who are at the cusp of launching their career, helping them both, first off, I guess, anticipate um, what it's like to live in a working world where values conflict. But maybe most importantly, where my research is focused is on how you find an authentic sense of calling, where you're able to do work that is the best expression of your natural gifts and is something that allows you to feel that, that sense of purpose in the work that you do. This is very important to me as someone who sought for that for a long time before I found it.
So, how did you find that?
Trial and error. Um, I changed my major multiple times as a college student. Anticipated trying out multiple, you avenues toward finding a career that would be fulfilling to me. And ultimately, I ended up getting an MBA almost by default because I decided here's a degree that should open a lot of doors for me. And since I haven't decided yet who I am, I'll just do an MBA. To be honest, the MBA was not the best fit for me at the time. I was a little bit of a fish out of water. Organizational behavior wasn't necessarily at the heart of what we were learning, and I didn't really resonate with finance and those things that were emphasized. So I struggled a little bit as an MBA student, and then I accepted an internship at a corporate headquarters near you, actually. Um, I was I was in I was in Kansas at I guess it's okay to use the company name because they no longer exist, but I worked at Payless Shoe
Yeah,
Source,
oh yeah, yeah,
corporate
yeah.
headquarters, and in Topeka, just down the road from
And I
Lawrence.
have a lot of friends who worked at Payless, of course, who stayed in
Yeah,
Kansas and transitioned in other jobs.
yeah. So I kind of fell into that again almost by default. It was the only internship I landed, so I took it. And it turned out to be an incredibly developmental experience. At the same time, it was really punishing. I ended up staying at that internship for an extra year. I was offered a full-time job to stick around a little longer. And that year and a half that I spent at Payless, I had a fantastic boss that helped me develop and introduce me to the field of organizational behavior. But the culture that I experienced was really a poor fit for me. It felt very competitive, a lot of machismo, a lot of focus on finance and sort of corporate success at all costs. I saw some things that really troubled me, and I essentially left that corporate experience feeling a little, more than a little jaded about business in general. I was really miserable during that time, but I look back on it and I wouldn't trade it for anything because it was coming out of that I realized I really care about a sense of purpose. I care about people finding work where they can be authentic to their values. And that reoriented me toward pursuing a PhD so I could study this thing that I'd experienced.
Oh, very interesting. So, what did you learn about finding an authentic sense of calling, and how do you teach students to go about this?
It's been a work of a career to answer that question. I certainly didn't have clarity about it when I started my PhD. In fact, again, that was a long, meandering journey of trying to figure out what I had to say to the world. But I fortuitously um, pursued a crazy research project that ought not to have worked. Um, my colleague Stuart Bunderson, we were PhD students together. He and I talked a lot about purpose and meaning, and we decided that we wanted to study people who have a strong sense of purpose, but nothing else. We wanted to isolate the phenomenon of people having a sense of purpose. So we looked for a profession where people didn't make a lot of money, didn't have much upward mobility, kind of strip away all of the usual incentives, but had this burning sense of purpose. And we ended up finding that, of all places, in the zoo. Um, we had watched or listened to an NPR broadcast about the zookeeping profession, and we thought, oh, there's something here. So started interviewing zookeepers and found this incredibly rich source of insight from people who, again, don't make any money, have no upward mobility. There's not a corporate ladder that they could even climb. And yet, despite all of the lack of the usual incentives, are deeply passionate about the work they do, deeply satisfied to be zookeepers, even though they weren't happy to not make money and aren't always treated well. And so we were kind of able to isolate this thing, this pure form of what zookeepers called calling. And that has reoriented my entire career. And that's what I teach about, is what I research, is finding a sense of calling in your work.
Timely because I was at the zoo yesterday, literally getting a
Aha.
behind the scenes tour from the zoo. We got to like pet the tortoises and we got to feed the bears. And I'm looking at these people and every different cage or area we go to, we're meeting with different zookeepers. And I suspect that they were all infinitely happier and satisfied than had I walked through maybe like Goldman Sachs or a place like that. They all seemed very content and happy, and they were engaging, and they were taking their time talking to us. So, as you think about calling, is do you think everybody has the chance to find a calling, or just some people luckier than others?
Okay, yeah, here's where I sound a little bit idealistic. I do. I believe that every individual is unique enough in their abilities, their background, that they can find a sense of calling in their life. Maybe not a one and only the sense. I don't believe there's sort of a predestined perfect job for anyone. But in some ways, a calling is also a choice one makes to engage in work that is well suited to what you do best, and to bring to that work an orientation towards serving others. And I think you can foster that sense of calling. And over the course of a career, I think most people can find that that glimmer of calling. Now, whenever I talk like that, there are people who say, "Well, you're talking about a really privileged position here. Like calling sounds a lot easier for someone who's had the benefit of an education and have had plenty of resources and a lot of choices about the work that they do. What about people who aren't, born with those privileges, or who don't have the opportunity for advanced education?" I've actually learned a lot about calling by studying people who work in what we call marginalized jobs or dirty jobs. And there's actually a good bit of documentation in our literature, in the organizational behavior literature, about the nobility of dirty work, and people who sort of imbue their work with this determination that they're going to help people with the work that they are doing. So yeah, I'm gonna come down on the side on the idealistic side of saying that I think calling is worth talking about, because I think everyone can move closer toward a sense of calling in their work.
Well, and I should also caveat my previous comment with, all of my friends that are in investment banking and working at the big four accounting firms. Some of them certainly feel very called to that position and thrive there. So I don't mean to throw them under the bus, but I can imagine there are a lot of associates and interns who are putting in the 120-hour weeks, wondering, if this is their ultimate calling. Uh, okay,
Yep.
so you don't necessarily believe maybe one true calling, but everybody can potentially, ideally, have a calling. You mentioned a sense of serving others. So is that one of the like most important aspects of finding a calling, or what else should people be looking for as they're trying to find their calling?
Yeah, the zookeeper study, as I boiled it down over the years, there are really three big messages. And by that, I mean, our goal with that study was to discover the ingredients of calling. How did zookeepers get there? What are the components? And so the big three, and I'll start with the one you mentioned, is an other orientation, a sense of service. Zookeepers' level of satisfaction comes largely because they interact with their animals every day. They know who they help, they love who they help, and they have this deep connection with those that they serve. And we find that throughout virtually every other narrative about calling in every profession. There's a connection to serving someone else. So a stewardship mentality. So that's the first thing. The second thing I've already kind of alluded to is embracing your own unique gifts. And so when we talk to zookeepers, they very consistently have childhood stories about just being an animal person. I was born with this passion for animals. I was that kid who would bring stray animals home. And so they have a very grounded sense of who they are, um, almost at a DNA level. I was made to do this. And so people are more likely to find a calling when they identify their gifts, when they recognize the passions that they naturally bring. So those are two ingredients. The third one was a big surprise, and it didn't really fit a typical academic framework because it felt a little bit cosmic. We ended up calling it destiny because zookeepers talked as if they had been led to call it to their calling. Even though none of them told a religious narrative in any of our interviews, they all felt like they use words like it just was magic. Everything worked out the way it was supposed to. You know, I was led here, I was guided here. And so I think one of the things that's going on there is people with a calling have this tendency to look gratefully at the circumstances of their life, and to see that the things that have happened to them and the ways their life have taken shape can, even if it's been really hard things, can also be a something that propels you in a way that you can serve. So there's this kind of combination of, who I am, what my gifts are, what's my hardwiring, what who can I help because of that hardwiring, and how can I recognize the ways that life has guided me to where I am so that I can serve those who are in my immediate purview.
This is so interesting to me because I just can 100% relate to what you're talking about. My first job out of undergrad, I graduated in business from BYU undergrad. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. Ended up getting recruited into medical device sales. So I was working in the operating room. I would provide the instruments and the implants for the surgeons to do the total hip replacement or total knee replacement. And so I'm in there. I'm not scrubbed in, but I've got my scrubs on and I've got the cap on. And so I'm there in all of the surgeries consulting with the doctors. And after doing that for a few months, I was like, you know what? I would rather be the doctor because I show up here. The patient is already unconscious when I get here. I do all my work. I'm there for 30 minutes, an hour, consulting with the doctor during surgery. I leave before the patient regains consciousness. I never interact with the people I'm
Yeah.
helping. And I thought, how much more satisfying would it be to be the doctor? The pay is actually can be comparable, which is kind of crazy too. It's not like the medical device reps can make a lot of money, but there was just like it was just so clear after such a short period of time that it would be so much more satisfying if I was the one interacting with the people I was helping. So I can definitely relate to that. Embracing your own gifts. I love that. It reminds me of a friend of mine, Adam Galinsky, one of the first professors I interviewed on the podcast. He was trying to do a 9 to 5 job and he couldn't do it. He was miserable and he hated it. And his bosses didn't appreciate his work. And then he found academia that allowed him to sleep a little later and work later. And just by finding something that worked for him, and now he's just thrives as an academic. And then maybe the last thing I'll say too is in terms of destiny, I ended up well, I can relate to you in terms of not knowing what I wanted to do. As I said, I was doing medical device, and then I was doing real estate, and then I was doing some startups, and then I went to law school, and then I did a PhD. And but once I got to Kansas, it's like, oh my gosh, I found it. Like this is it. And I started feeling that along the way. Like as I was doing the PhD, I was like, okay, I think this is actually it. And I'm always excited about things at first, but then after like 3 years, I'm still excited. And 5 years, I'm still excited. And then I did a postdoc at Notre Dame and I'm like, wow, I'm really loving this. And one thing my wife and I talk about often is we feel like we were guided. We feel that same way. Like all these experiences we had led us to this point, and so that's really interesting that the zookeepers and others that you've studied are look gratefully at how they got there, but feel like there was something kind of guiding them to where they were at.
Yeah, sort of a hand of fate. And I think I'll add, I love that you're relating to this. I get excited every time I talk to someone who feels like, hey, I think I found it. And if you had asked me a few years ago if I'd kind of arrived at my calling, I would say absolutely yes. I'm doing exactly what I want to do for the rest of my career. I'll retire doing this. But then I got a little restless a few years ago, and I couldn't figure that out. But then then out of the blue, never expected this. A new center was announced here at BYU, a $40 million endowment to develop a center for moral and ethical leadership. And I heard about that and I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? But that's not really what I do. And then I was asked to direct it.
Wow.
And I had to have a really sort of a hard talk with myself to say, am I ready to accept this jolt to my career? I ultimately, after much wrestling, decided to say yes. So for the last couple of years, I've been directing a new center, which is a completely new career in some way. I feel like an entrepreneur building something from scratch, except that all the resources have been handed to me. And I find that there was more to my calling than I thought, because this center that I didn't seek out is now drawing upon and making coherent even more of my history that now is coming together and allowing me to serve in a way that, although I didn't anticipate, now it's like obvious that this was supposed to happen. And I'm so grateful for that. So I guess I would say to any of your listeners, calling is really not a destination. It is an ever reverberating process of finding deeper resonance about what you can give and what you have to say to the world. And I think it changes over time.
Really interesting to me as well and relevant because this podcast has become a bit of a calling for me. And I didn't go into academia to start a podcast, but then, I was doing radio broadcasting for 10 years when I was doing my law school and PhD. And it was
Yeah, I
interesting.
listen to you on the radio, Nate. I
Okay, so
very familiar with your voice.
so yeah, I used to interview people all the time, and then I started the podcast, and I started it just as monologues. I had no intention of interviewing anybody, and it actually took maybe a half dozen people to convince me to start interviewing other people, and then I started doing it, and now I've arrived at this new calling on top of my current position as a full-time professor. So that's interesting to hear that it's not just a destiny. We can always be looking for ways to enhance what we have and find new callings. It reminds me also of one of the previous guests, Arden Pope. He was my Econ 110 professor at BYU, and one of his lessons that he really tries to live by and that he feels like has helped him is just look for good opportunities and latch onto them when they come along. And so I think that's part of this, right? Is when there's an opportunity, when you see something that is maybe calling-esque, uh, just because you found one calling before doesn't mean you can't keep looking to build on what you have. So I think it's
Yeah.
just so relevant.
I love that because someone could look at your career as an academic and say, what was this radio interviewing stuff you were doing? That's not the typical academic path, but recognizing that that's part of your background, your natural set of gifts, the fact that you're bringing that back into your academic career, that's really exciting to me. That shows that you were able to put your own stamp on the shape of your career. And that's what calling feels like. It's usually not the one great thing that I'm better than anyone else in the world at. Very few of us are going to become number one in the world at any one thing. But if we take the accumulation of these different strands of our life and weave them together, we become really unique in our contributions, whatever our role is.
Well, Jeff, this has been so fun for me. I get that, that feeling inside I get when I found my calling, and I I I guess part of it too is like when I learn something that just really connects and resonates with me, it kind of lights me on fire. And that's one of the reasons why I ultimately ended up in academia is because I love that feeling of learning something where I feel like I'm gaining kind of real insight into either humanity or just how the world works. And I feel like you have provided that for me today. And so I just want to thank you so much for sharing these lessons that spoke to me so clearly in a way that got me all excited again. So thank you, Jeff.
Thanks. Well, that makes me very happy. I'm feeding off your energy as well because I can tell you love what you're doing. So this has been really fun. I appreciate it.